Well, Nigeria2015, moving on before noon, check your time, and we're actually very excited about developments in the country. Correspondents report from across the country telling us pretty well everything is going on smoothly. Well, it's midweek, by the way, for an election that started off on Saturday, taking us into the next day, which was Palm Sunday, and of course waiting for the big moment which finally came in the early hours of today. Welcome to this honor hour right here in the studios. Now we're not being joined by Dr. Dele Asheru. He's a political scientist. And good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Well, pretty soon our Abuja studios will also be live as well. We'll be speaking with Eseme Ayibo, who is a former member of the National Assembly. Specifically, he was a spokesperson at that time in the House of Representatives, looking at this particular victory for the president-elect. Now, I think basically people will talk less of his political party affiliation now and be looking at him more nationalistic. And now, Dr. Asheru, I think this very first question will come to you. Now, we have to look at how we really can move forward for an election that has so much of acrimonies leading up to this particular day, getting to see that the high point of the election is the acceptance just before the final results came on by the president, Goodluck Jonathan. What does that mean to this whole development of nation building, which is on the agenda as we speak?
Well, thank you very much. I think the point to emphasize is the spirit of sportsmanship which the outgoing president has displayed. And that, for me, will lay the basis or the foundation for the reconciliation that is badly needed in the country at the moment.
How badly do we need it?
We need it so badly because the division which flows, inelectively from the electoral process, there will be the need to consciously heal the wounds that this election have created. And in doing that, the incoming president has a lot of responsibility in understanding that he is no longer the president of either a political party or a section of the country. He's president of Nigeria, and he must be prepared to have an all-inclusive government so that we can quickly put this election past us and concentrate on the task of nation building.
Well, so many areas have been very contentious. People say that politics is highly contentious in our climes because there's that winner-take-all syndrome. What are some of the areas that you think we can begin to amend to ensure that the winner is also sharing some with those who didn't win? Even though in this case, we all say that we are winners.
Well, I think the first thing to do is to begin to look at, the incoming cabinet. And in doing that, the president must ensure that, all sections, all geopolitical zones of the country gets a fair share of, I don't want to use the common Nigerian parlance, dividend of democracy. But to be specific, the president must put together a cabinet that is reflective of the geopolitics of Nigeria. In doing that, everybody will have a sense of belonging, and all hands will be on deck to ensure that, all the cracks that we have had in the polity is quickly mended.
One other issue we looked at before we left the studios to go for our business segment of this program was looking at the effect of Godfatherism in our nation's polity, which for Dr. Olagbena, he was of the opinion that he had to categorize them into two, the positive and the negative, the good and the bad side of Godfatherism. How much can that help us? How much of that do we need at this point in time, if we need it at all, or if we don't? How can this new government coming in can stay focused and deal less of any kind of interference that we want to call Godfatherism in our polity?
Well, I don't know how to categorize Godfatherism into either positive or negative. The connotation which it has in Nigeria is simply put negative. And one thing that this election will do for Nigeria is that we have a president whose resolve is unprecedented. And I doubt whether the person of Buhari that we know, except if the dynamics change, the individual, that character called General Muhammadu Buhari, I don't think that he could be influenced by, the talk about Godfather or Godfatherism, in quote. So my opinion is that given the pedigree of General Muhammadu Buhari, I think he's coming into this office with a lot of resolve, a lot of commitment to change the way Nigerian politics used to be in the past. So I don't think that will in any way influence what he will do in office.
It was a very long and tortuous walk down this road. We were coming from, even though it's difficult to say where exactly we started from, but some people might say that the first step was when we finally switched to democracy in 1999. We've had 16 years of unbroken democratic rule, and this 16th year, it would seem we finally have two parties we can say are truly two parties. Now, one major role is the role of the umpire. How would you assess the role of, or the evolution of INEC, and where will you say they are currently? Or where are we with INEC as a country? Because INEC is supposed to be on the people's side, shouldn't it?
Well, I think INEC deserves a lot of commendation for bringing us thus far in the political evolution of Nigeria. I want to say that there are no perfect elections anywhere in the world. Even in the celebrated democracies, the very nature of election makes it difficult to achieve perfection. But if we compare what an umpire used to be before those in the saddle now, we find out that we now have a semblance of an institution that can be called an umpire. If we compare this with, for example, the 2007 election, you seem not to know the difference between the umpire and the spokesperson of the ruling party. But if you look at the way Professor Atairu Jega carried on, even before this election, you see an umpire who is committed, to being fair to all, who is committed to being, to be seen, to be evolving a system, a process that will eliminate all the vices we used to have in our electoral process. And I dare say, that's why, the issues of the permanent voters card, the issues of the card reader, issues, even during the concluding part, of the process which started, you can see how, he's being pointedly accused of tribalism, of ethnicity, of all kinds of, and if you listen to his response, you will see that this is somebody who had tried as much as possible to live up to the name as an umpire. So for me, I think INEC have done so well, even though a lot still needs to be desired in terms of, perfecting, the electoral process at the local level, at the polling unit level, and all that. But having said that, I think there is that commitment, there's that focus to ensuring that that institution lives up to its name.
It's very important that we raise this issue because let me be very, very categorical now. The PDP, at least in Lagos State, has raised issues with, the results of the election. The president didn't make reference to it, but he said that the courts will be the place to go and handle that, however it is anyone feels about the polls. It will be more contentious because the governorship elections are just at hand. You saw the battle we had before these elections, especially with the use or not to use card readers, and how they eventually performed on that day What is your assessment? How do you think that people are going to be taking INEC to task, especially with the elections ahead?
Well, you know, certainly because it's an electoral umpire, there will be this constant engagement with that institution, INEC. The card readers really created some problems at the start of the concluded presidential election. But in responding to that, INEC, I mean, at some point said, okay, where the card readers are not working, manual accreditation, you know, can go on so that people can vote. My opinion is that before the next election, I think INEC will need to sit down to look at the problems with the card readers and try to fix them as much as possible.
So you still think they should be used for this?
I still strongly think the card readers should be used. I still think so very strongly.
You think the political parties will cooperate with that, looking at the problems that they had with this recent one?
You see, when in a reforming process, you don't expect everybody to come on board. You see, one of the reasons why political parties are insisting that they don't want the card readers is because the manual accreditation is susceptible to a lot of manipulation. And like we can see in some of the results that are coming in from, you know, several parts of the country, I am sure that if the card readers had worked the way they should, a lot of these, you know, skirmishes, a lot of these controversies would have been avoided. So I am of the opinion that INEC should, between now and the next election, find means of ensuring that the card readers work. When that happens, we can then marry, you know, handwritten accreditations made at the several polling units with the ones that are recorded by the card readers. And that will give us a clearer picture of the voting pattern. So I am of the opinion that all hands should be on deck to make sure that the card readers work before the next election.
That phrase, all hands be on deck, might be a phrase that a lot of people will say, hey, not all hands will be on deck, because some people have this attitude of, it has to be this, it has to be that. It has to be my people, it has to be my religion. So even if INEC works to get the card readers all right for the next election, my colleague asked the question, would it work? How would it work if the people's attitude hasn't changed?
Well, I don't think that the people's attitude has anything to do with it. If the card readers are working, they are working.
Yeah, you think nobody, in terms of like, they can't be sabotaged?
Yeah, and that's why I'm insisting that all hands must be on deck. Yeah, it's technology. There will be, I mean, sabotage, but INEC also must be proactive, must realize that, look, if we are trying to beat these people to the game, they also will want to beat INEC to it. So INEC should be more proactive. Look at, I mean, there's a test case at the moment. Look at the gaps and try to plug it. I don't think it's impossible.
Yeah, if you look at a state like Edo State now that has 18 local governments, which only elections held in 17, the results of one, in fact, elections did not hold in one particular local government, and if you look at the number of suspended and cancelled votes, getting close to 150,000, you have to ask, are you sure that politicians will say it's okay to use? In some other states, it might not breed plenty of contention, especially where it's expected to go the way of a particular party. But in some other states, that will be hotly contested. You know, how do you think it's going to go?
Well, I just think that for whatever it takes, INEC should just make sure that the card readers work. I just think so.
Also looking at the total number, the figures that we have, we're looking at about 24 or 25 million votes cast in this election. People say it's one of the lowest turnouts we've ever seen. Do you think that we're beginning to get to, you know, say a credible number of figures that we can now begin to rely on? Because I have been collating figures from 1979, and one of the figures I found interesting was the year 1993, where about 14 million Nigerians turned out to vote, were less than 15 million, but people said that election were the most credible they had seen so far. Now we're getting to another set of figures that are not so high, but it would seem that the figures are beginning to be a little more acceptable to Nigerians than, say, the figures of 2003 and 2007. What is your thinking on that?
You see, my thinking, like I pointed out earlier, is, you see, manipulation of elections begin at the level of accreditation. Once you don't get the accreditation right, figures, they begin to manipulate and manufacture figures. Now, if accreditations are properly done, we know the total number of people that are accredited for the election. Then when results are coming in, it follows ipso facto that the numbers of the total valid votes must not exceed accreditation.
Well, Dr. I should just give us a moment there. We'll hold your train of thought. We'll continue in that regard, as well as also look at the moral of this particular victory for us as a people. While Nigeria 2015 takes a moment now, we'll return shortly. Stay with us.